Hi everyone, and welcome to open discussion session courtesy of H Club. Today's theme being that of film. I'd like to welcome our guests. Maybe they can introduce themselves. Rory, do you want to start?
Hi everyone, my name's Rory Aitken. I'm a producer and a partner at 42. We're a production and management company based in London and LA.
Gurinder?
Hi, I'm Gurinder Chadha, filmmaker.
Rupert?
Hi everyone, my name is Rupert Preston, CEO of Vertigo Releasing, and run all the film activities at Vertigo Films.
And Jason?
Hi, I'm Jason Isaacs. I'm mostly an actor, but unknown to most people. I do quite a lot of producing in the background.
Thanks everyone. So Gurinder, maybe you could just start by telling us what a normal day looks like for you at the moment.
Normal day for me is getting the kids up and getting them in front of their computers so they have their form time on time. And then if I feel like the world is getting too much, I go back to bed and watch YouTube videos or WhatsApp videos. Or if I'm feeling industrious, then I get onto the computer and I start writing. I do have quite a lot of writing projects, and I have been writing a script. And so it depends. There's so many distractions out there. If I can focus, then I'll focus and I'll work. And then LA opens obviously around 4 o'clock for us. And so I often have quite a lot of Zoom meetings with LA, and that takes me through the evening. And then the rest of it seems to revolve around meals, cooking delicious meals for the kids at 1 o'clock, healthy meals with whatever we've got. So food's become quite a big number, because you're eating 3 meals a day all the time at home. So that's quite a big thing. But I have to say, once we settled into lockdown, work got much easier, and there seems to be quite a lot of stuff happening around, even though we are in lockdown now.
And Jason, obviously the acting is a bit tougher right now, but you said you've been producing, and have you managed to be productive during this period and develop some of your projects?
I've learned, I've always wanted to learn Aramaic, and I bake a lot of bread now, and I've written a couple of songs, and I've done fuck all. I find it very, very hard to be productive at the moment. I've got kids, and there's industrial quantities of cleaning and laundry, and they're teenagers, so they're self-isolating from their parents, and always have been, but they make an incredible amount of mess. There seems to be an awful lot. I know it's true for me and all of my friends and people who are much more famous. There's an awful lot of charity stuff to do. There's a lot of appeal. All the funding for charities have dried up everywhere, and so anyone with any profile is asked to make lots of videos and poems and whatever messages of support to frontline workers. And then there is work. I mean, as I'm sure the discussion will find out, there's an awful lot of discussing things. There's a lot of activity. How much of it will ever turn into anything, I don't know, but there's people are managing to fill their days with what seem to be, to my mind, ludicrous notions of how we're going to go back to work. But there's a lot of that. And then in the evening, what I'm hoping to do is catch up with probably most of you and fill this abyss where film knowledge should be. And I was hoping this would be my film school. And I have the Criterion Collection and Netflix and Amazon and Biffa and BAFTA websites and a million other things, and HBO. And my children will only watch fucking Grey's Anatomy. That's all. And I've seen 12,000 episodes of it. We finally got to the end. Not that it's not good, but I like Ben and Jerry's fish food ice cream, but I wouldn't want it all day, every day. And we got to the last episode, and I heard the angels singing, and then they went back to season 1. And that's all I've been watching. Yeah, it's exquisite torture.
Rupert, maybe I could ask as a producer, but also as a distributor, have you as a business managed to take advantage of the fact that people are at home and consuming content? Is that something you've managed to sort of pivot and help provide content for?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we have. I mean, in some ways, we're all quite lucky in that we're in the home entertainment business in some shape or form. So initially, we had 2 films which were lined up in April for cinema release, one being Vivarium, Jesse Eisenberg movie, which is very cool, and The Assistant, which is a great film as well. So initially those were sort of proper, you know, normal theatrical releases, but we instantly pivoted Vivarium to a digital release straight away, and it's done really well. And The Assistant came out 2 weekends ago, and we had a great, genuinely, I mean, it's disappointing, obviously cinemas were not open, but they performed really, really well for us digitally. The Assistant really has. So it's actually quite a proud moment. We kind of see it up in the top 10 digital charts, this kind of small independent movie, literally next to 1917 and Sonic Hedgehog or whatever. So it's pretty cool. So that's, we've shifted that around very quickly. And then, to be honest, as a company, we decided to move much more into the digital landscape this year anyway. So we'd lined up quite a lot of releases for digital, but the company's busy. I mean, everyone's working from home. So the days for us all, it's a bit like the Wild West to begin with everything changing very, very quickly overnight. So it's quite exciting. And the team's been brilliant. So we kind of have a daily Zoom call, as I'm sure some of us do, with the team at 10 o'clock every day. And then the mornings are spent on the phones, just making sure everything's working and everything's going well. And then afternoons I tend to just watch films. There's lots of films we're trying to acquire. So it's looking at stuff, reading scripts. And we also set up a joint venture in Australia for distribution a couple of months ago. So we've got films out there being released. So there's normally once a week or twice a week, we have a call in the evening with the guys out there. So we're busy. And then on the personal side, it's trying to, you know, we're walking the dogs a lot. So getting very fit, they're getting fit. Like some of the other guys got a teenage daughter who's having a great time in some ways. I had a text from her yesterday to tell me that she'd left her washing outside in the hall to go into the washing machine, which is great. And it's been quite nice actually in some ways. We spent some weeks together, which we wouldn't normally all do because we're all quite busy traveling around and at school and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're all fairly desperate to get back some kind of normal, but it's been all right. It's been good.
And Rory, I know you've got kids. I'm sure you've been doing your fair share of homeschooling and laundry, etc. But how has your business been affected, and how have you managed to adapt?
Well, certainly, I've never been busier. I don't know, all these memes about like, you know, people having lots of time in their hands. I don't know how we ever fitted in a commute and lunch and all the rest of it. But there are a few different dimensions to our business. I'm a producer. We on the production side of our business, we're a production company like any other. We're based here, and my producing partner Ben Pugh is based in LA. And we do film and TV in both places. But also, we're on the other side of the company, we're a management company, so we manage actors, writers, and directors. And it's been interesting because it's been very different in every different part of the company, because obviously writers are carrying on. In fact, I think they're sort of almost relishing the rest of the world's having an insight into the way that they work, but otherwise haven't seen much change. In fact, if anything, there's been more pressure on the managers of the writers, because suddenly everybody wants to get their deals done, wants their projects being written. So they've never been busier. We represent actors and directors who suddenly are not working, and that obviously comes with all of its own pressures as well. But there's lots of conversations about what might happen when, and suddenly there's dates of, you know, if a production might be shifting back, it's going to hit the dates of another production that might have been booked for later in the year. So there's all sorts of things they're figuring out there. And on the production side, we had one movie that was filming for Netflix in America, and that stopped. So we will pick that up when it's possible. And then we had one that was just starting to prep in Poland. So that we're looking at when we pick up. And then there's just a million conversations about what might happen when. And then all of this time to develop. So we're developing like crazy. I mean, I know we'll talk about all sorts of elements of this, but in theory, in a year's time, everything that starts getting made should be incredibly good, because it's had more time to be developed and improved rather than rushed into production. So I'm not sure whether that theory will necessarily bear out, but we're certainly developing pretty hard. And then just managing the team, because there's 40 of us here in London, 10 in LA, and we've furloughed some people, and some people are super busy, some people are less busy. So there's just a lot of management around that, and also just getting to grips with how we work as teams. You know, there's a lot of Zoom meetings, from just a team meeting we have in the morning, but to like 3 o'clock we have, which I'll miss today, we have what we call a tea break, which is sort of replicates what you would do in the office if you wandered into the kitchen and ended up having a chat with that person that you wouldn't normally talk to during the day. So you can all get on Zoom and have a chat. So we're just constantly trying to innovate and come up with things to keep everyone engaged, make sure no one's too lonely or feeling isolated. And it's just, it changes every day, really.
And Gurinder, you said you were writing something, and all of you are involved in development in one way or another. When the thing you're writing, or the things you're thinking about writing, Gurinder, are those affected by what you imagine audiences might be interested or want after this, or are you putting that aside and just focusing on the stories you were already wanting to tell?
Oh no, I think everything we talk about now is it set pre-COVID or post-COVID, you know? And if you're writing something contemporary, you have to factor in COVID and what the new normal is going to be, for sure. So the script that I have been writing, and I've done now the second draft, that is post-COVID, but I'm treating it like it's fine, that it's a long way in the future sort of thing, you know. But there is another project I had that has certainly been affected by, you know, COVID. So I think creatively we do have to think that in the future things will be different. I mean, even now, I think when we all watch our screens, watch movies or TV, everyone slightly cringes when people are sort of standing too close to each other, or when, you know, people are touching, or, you know, because it's become normal for us to sort of distance. So that's quite interesting. But I think that the hard thing really is imagining when you're going to go into production, you know, as you guys were saying. I mean, just before lockdown, I had a meeting with a financier, and my film was set. It was like, done, sorted, we're doing it. And then that was a week before lockdown, when we all used to shake hands with elbows, if you remember. And then now I was thinking, okay, when will I be able to shoot? So that, I think, is the biggest concern right now, is when will we all be able to get back to production? And I think that, I know the BFI is planning all kinds of, you know, health initiatives, but I think the question remains, how do, and Jason will know this, how do we shoot with actors who are in the same scenes, you know, with close proximity? How do we do two shots?
I mean, sorry, I don't mean to jump in, but I think the challenge is so much bigger than that, because actors, you could actually, depending on the length of the project, with the film as opposed to a TV series, you could actually quarantine actors and they could behave as if they're in the same household and after a certain length of time. With the new tests that will be coming along that will test for the antigen on the day you're infectious, it'll be fine. But if you quarantine the entire crew, there was a production that shut down in Australia that filmed right through COVID, but the grip sneaked out and shagged his girlfriend and it was dead. You know, so if you quarantine the entire crew, everybody who's coming in to do one line, can we really socially distance a full set, or do we go to the places around the world that I'm sure all of you are looking at now, where they don't have these restrictions, or they don't have the same guidelines that you know, BAFTA have just issued, or I don't know if you've all seen the Bulgarian protocols, these various different protocols that are being floated and mooted, that everybody's having very serious discussions about. And I think all of my friends, at least, are getting off the Zoom going, who's going to be the first person to say that that's just not practical? So the actors are probably the least of our problems, because actors will isolate and quarantine, but can you expect the rest of the crew to do it as well?
I think it's easier behind the camera to have distancing. I think the hardest things that I can think of is, one is the focus puller, because they're right next to the camera operator, and also in terms of sound people is applying mics, you know, to radio mics. But I think one can accommodate that, because, you know, people can put mics on themselves, and also you can do remote Zooms, right? So I think it's easier behind the scenes to, to make it work. I think it's that physical thing. But as you say, if actors are prepared to be in quarantine together for 14 days or whatever it is, and then obviously the director too, in terms of being close to give notes and stuff. But I don't think there's an easy solution. I think you have to take what is your film, what do you need for your film, and how will you make that work within our own inbred conditioning now of social distance. And for example, like the movie I've written is a musical, and there's sort of song and dance sequences, and there's a choir. And so how are the choir all going to sing when as soon as they come off set, they all have face masks on, and and then going back in? I think there has to be a sort of sense of confidence for all of us, just like everyone else in society. I think we need that herd community, or we need to feel confident in antibody testing or in vaccines. So as a society, we feel confident, then we're part of society, and I think that's how we move forward.
We obviously are all talking about how we can produce again, and what a socially distant set looks like, and what production looks like. And it's very complicated, and I'm sure doable to a greater or lesser extent, but no less difficult. But the other big conversation in the film world at the moment is about theatrical versus home video or home entertainment, big screen versus small screen. Do you, sort of an open question to you all really, but do you think that viewer habits will be fundamentally changed by this? Do you think that theatrical, which was already, at least for independent film, under quite a bit of pressure, will be sort of permanently affected by this? Maybe Rupert, you could start on that.
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely two sides to it. I mean, there's the emotional side of the cinema experience, which I think will be increased. I think obviously by the time, hopefully, we come out of this and things get back to a new normal, to normal, whenever it is, when there's a vaccine, I think there'll be a longing for that communal kind of experience, be it to see a film, theatre, music, festival, whatever it might be. And I think I'm hoping there'll be, that kind of emotional experience you don't get, and people will increase, the need for that will increase hugely, I think. So I think that will always be there, and I genuinely think that will, in a year's, 2 years, 3 years time, people will just want to have that kind of emotional communal experience again. But from an economic point of view, it's very different. I think it's absolutely going to be tougher for independents, certainly for the next year in cinemas, with social distancing that's happening at the moment. I'm sure cinemas will, when they open, they'll just be, if you have a 10-screen cinema, for instance, I'm sure, because they'll have less shows and it will be much slower for people to go into those cinemas and come out, and then they'll be working on reduced capacities to make it work for themselves. They're clearly just going to be, if there's the James Bond films out and you've got a 10-screen cinema, you probably have the James Bond movie playing in 9 screens. And you can understand why, because it will take so much more money than everything else. So I think if you're an independent, or even, your film is not at the blockbuster status, the economics of cinema is going to get much, much tougher in the next few months. So, I mean, that's the big challenge for lots of people, clearly. But the plus side is, as you can see, I think everything's accelerated in like a few weeks, which might have taken several years. The windows have to condense, they have to change. You can't just keep to the 16-week windows for most films. So I think the blockbusters will absolutely, their economics will work better or as good with cinemas going forward. But for everyone else, there'll be changes, whether it's in a few months' time or a year's time, I'm not sure. But for us as a company, we've had to embrace it, and we're moving, forward into that sort of digital world. And obviously, once the cinemas reopen, we'll want to work with them, and we've got some films which want to be seen on that bigger screen. But the reality is, it's going to be much harder for us to get those screens.
And thanks. And Jason, are you seeing in the projects you're working on and the roles you're being offered, more of a swing towards high-end television? I mean, everyone here is involved in high-end television as well as.
I think, well, first of all, there are places opening up around the world to shoot right now. But you know, when you're making a film, as everyone here knows, and I'm sure everyone watching, you're a year and a half or 2 years away from when it would come out in the cinemas. And I find myself very confused because on the one hand, there will be public health guidelines and you know, health and safety at work guidelines that will require cinemas to have gaps and, you know, alternate rows and stuff. On the other hand, I'm looking at when the government eased, you know, made an announcement about easing the lockdown slightly, and out of my window is a park, and I see bunches of people who are face to face without masks. I see buses that are packed and tubes that are packed. So I think there is a hunger, maybe an ignorance in the general public who think that someone else has decided it's not that risky for them. I also think that we're very close to, although who knows, therapeutics, if not a vaccine, but therapeutics, which will mean that when you catch this thing, it's not necessarily fatal. And as we do more testing and tracing, we'll find out quite what percentage penetration there is and who is at risk. And there seems to be either a recklessness or a pragmatism, depending on your point of view, in the public, and they will want to go back to the cinema. I personally wouldn't want to go. I don't want to get on a plane, and I don't want to go anywhere indoors until there are decent drugs around. But it seems like the public do, and so if it's not a government mandate, I don't know that we will have massive social distancing in cinemas if we then don't have it in other places. Certainly in a year from now, any film we're about to make isn't going to come out in under a year. So I'm not sure. In terms of the projects I'm offered, I don't quite understand why no one's calling The Emperor naked. There are a whole range of things. There's a lot of stuff I'm involved with that seems to be fully financed, ready to go, of every different budget, of every different hue. And I don't understand what world they think they're making it for. I do think that there's money that wants to be put into films. There are people who want their businesses to keep going, of course. But I don't know why they think that there will be a theatrical world to justify the budgets. I think budgets are going to have to come down so that we can go straight to streaming and not lose money.
And Rory, you just to follow on from that point about streaming, you guys produce a lot for Netflix. You know, obviously a lot has been written about how well they and the streamers generally are doing. Again, do you think that's a sort of unstoppable force, or do you think the ecosystem can kind of continue to exist in balance with traditional theatrical and traditional windows?
Well, I mean, my impression is that you're talking about will things kind of change for good. My impression is that this has accelerated things that were already happening. I think the theatrical space was challenging anyway, particularly for independent films. And Netflix has been growing. You know, it was only a few years ago, it was a company that sent you DVDs in the post and you posted them back. It didn't seem like this would be a brand that is now kind of on a par with like Coca-Cola globally. And it's worth, as a company, it's worth more than Disney. You know, and I think people are turning to those platforms. And, you know, I say this to a group where we've all been au fait with Netflix for a long time, but suddenly my parents can operate Netflix, my parents can operate Zoom. Like, it's just expanding outwards so much quicker, and therefore I think they're taking a stronger grip of that marketplace, which everyone has their own interpretation of whether that's good or bad. They're certainly putting a lot of money into content, so it's not too bad, and they seem to be spreading it out internationally. It's not all just product coming out of the US to the rest of the world. You know,
Rory, are they looking at single dramas though to replace the independent film, or are they looking at series always?
Well, both, and the film and series sides are quite separate. Actually, I'm always slightly surprised by how separate they are at Netflix. The one thing from a UK perspective they don't yet have, I don't have information on whether they will do, but I'm rather hoping they will do, is commissioning films directly out of the UK. They commission UK films out of LA, but they do have a growing UK commissioning team on the TV side, on the series side in the UK, which I think is good for the UK market because it's one more buyer, and it's a buyer that will spend the money. So I think but also all of the others, you know, Apple, Disney Plus, Amazon, and the growing group of them, which, you know, HBO Max will probably come here, Peacock is growing, etc., etc. And I think they're all in an incredibly strong position. not only because a lot of people are watching them, but also as we're talking about productions going back now, the big issue for me is it's not about the protocols. Of course they're important and we've got to figure those out, but unless somebody is prepared to underwrite the risk of the whole thing collapsing, it's not going to happen, whatever anybody says. Now, with an independent film, everybody's looking at each other going, well, who's going to insure against that risk? And the insurers aren't there yet, and probably won't be for a bit. I mean, I gather that the Screen Task Force is working with the government on some solutions now, which sound potentially promising, albeit they might not happen that quickly. But if you're a streamer and you're financing the whole thing, you can take that risk. Now, they may or may not, but they might look at certain productions and think, well, if we're prepared to underwrite the possibility of shutdown here, we get the advantage of getting things into production and therefore getting things out on our service sooner than others can get them out. So they can use that massive scale that they have and all the money that they have to really foment their advantage in the marketplace. And I think that was probably coming anyway, but I think this situation has played into their hands particularly. And I think it's challenging for independent films. I think it's challenging for UK television, which is more and more like independent film because it's multi-party financed. I think single financiers or projects financed by one financier have an advantage at this point. And then obviously streamers have an advantage because everyone's now signed up to them, and probably my parents and whoever else have signed up to it, not going to let their subscription go, so they'll keep on growing.
And Gurinder, as a filmmaker, do you consider yourself to be platform agnostic? How important is the theatrical experience for you, for your films, or are you just happy for them to be seen by as wide an audience as possible?
Well, I think there's horses for courses. I think that there are some movies that are made for the big screen, and some that can be streamed and be treated as a film that you would watch at home. And I think that I would hate to see the end of cinema, but at the same time, I appreciate the amount of work that streamers have generated, for the industry. So I think we want to keep going on all fronts, really. And the movie that I've written, I'm talking to, studio, so it will be a theatrical release. But at the same time, I've been working on an animation film actually with Netflix as well, which I think will probably have a bit of a theatrical release, but is aimed, for the platform. So I think that as a filmmaker, every filmmaker wants to see their film on the big screen for sure, but I think that also, filmmakers want their film seen. So I think that you just have to judge how best your story is going to work, on that smaller screen or the big screen. I think coupled with what Rory was saying and everyone was saying about, how everyone's subscribing to Netflix, everyone knows how to use it. I think that I think we will find that there will probably be a resurgence in cinema after this, because it was just like, in the 70s, 80s, when VHS came in and everyone was like, oh my God, VHS, we can watch movies at home. We don't have to go to the cinema. And everyone thought it was the end of the movies because we could control and record and play movies when we want and stop and start them. But then cinema enjoyed a big boom. So I think it is a cultural art form and people do enjoy the experience. I just hope that the endeavours of the BFI and the COVID-19 Film and Cinema Fund are able to sustain independent cinemas. That's really, I think, the important thing is independent companies and independent cinemas, can those be sustained through this period? And I think that it would be great if there was a bit more of a concerted effort across all commissioning platforms, terrestrial, as well as streamers, to divvy out and make sure all companies have work at this time. And I remember when, I'm old enough to remember when Channel 4 started, and one of the things about Channel 4 when it started was that they wanted to make sure every small production company had a commission, so that they built the sector. And what ended up happening was you ended up having big companies like Mentor, and you have the super companies, but their initial initiative was to develop an industry. And I think maybe we need to go back to those sort of initiatives to make sure those voices and those elements of our British film industry in particular are able to survive and then come through and are actually commissioned to create work. And then there's an effort to promote British films in theatres and cinemas, and we make sure exhibitors, oh sorry, that's my dog. We make sure exhibitors actually are made to show the films.
Just on the promotion, topic of promotion, a huge topic of discussion again in independent film is what do we do in the absence of festivals and films being able to premiere at festivals, and the kind of publicity and profile that you can gain from those. I don't know what the answer is in the short term, but Jason, how do you how do you see yourself promoting the projects you're involved with?
That's pretty easy. I've got a ring light here because Warner Brothers sent one, because I've already done a junket and I've got others coming up, and so have all my friends. Films are coming out, and people are at home, so they're watching television. And television is the main means of promoting things anyway. I don't think it's a problem. There's the incredible film festival coming up between the 29th and 7th, where all the film festivals in the world are combining their material. So in terms of, there are social things to be missed from going to film festivals, from all of us, I'm sure. And I don't think anybody would disagree. There's nothing like having a story told to you in a big dark room with hundreds of other people. And we all hope it returns soon. But in terms of promotion, that's easy, I think. I mean, you have screen time, and if you have money and access, and actors who are sometimes difficult to wrangle into publicity surely can't make the excuse that they're too busy because they're sitting at home. I was talking to a producer friend of mine yesterday in Hollywood who does quite big budget movies. She said the thing that is proving most difficult for her is that none of the stars she's after want to work. They don't want to go anywhere until it's completely safe. Well, many people are compelled by necessity to go back to work, and and people with big companies like some of you guys and many others want the company to keep working, unfurlough workers. But a lot of the big stars who will get bigger films financed just don't want to leave their family. They don't want to go anywhere, not just out of cowardice, but so rather it's not cowardice. It's not just about feeling physically safe. They just don't feel they're compelled to do it. So I'm wondering what will happen to those bigger budget things. But anyway, the question about publicity, I think, is easy. And we're all used to watching people broadcasting from home. And as long as people are entertaining and tell rude stories on Graham Norton, it won't be a problem selling things.
And one of the questions that's come up in the Q&A is sort of about what types of films we're likely to see coming out first that are produced in this period. A question from Liz Smith was, do you anticipate a boom in new films akin to mumblecore, like in the early 2000s, made on a small scale with whatever we have at hand? Rupert, maybe you can talk about the types of projects which you're looking to do. Are you going to be making sort of smaller things, either in film or high-end TV, that you can do during social distancing, or are you just going to wait until, as Jason says, everyone's more comfortable and anyone will come back to work?
I think on the distribution side, it's very clear that certainly what the streamers want and what's working digitally on all the platforms is just pure genre product and not mumblecore. I mean, I released an incredible, beautiful film called Hump Day, which sadly the director died, Lynn Shelton. She's brilliant actually. But so I mean, which was a perfect what you might call mumblecore movie. But unfortunately, those films don't particularly work out in the sort of the commercial world. So people do want pure genre movies. And moving forward, I think it's trying to find those films that you could easily put into a genre, be it horror, comedy, action, but independent films that have to have some kind of originality as well, and have to be able to connect. I think that's the biggest thing, is having films, or whether it's a film or a long-term, a series that can connect with an audience, which is an incredibly easy thing to say, but it's actually the hardest thing to do. I mean, Gurinder manages it, all the time. Hence her films are sort of work, and Rory's show on Netflix at the moment, The English Game, you know, I watched and love, my mum watched and loved, and they, you know, they connect. And I think that's what people will want. The show we produced on TV just now, Bulletproof, which Nick Love is the showrunner on. Again, his films and his TV shows, they just managed to connect with a clear audience. And that's the key. I mean, that's absolutely what it's all about. So for films which we're looking to acquire, it's very much clear films in good genres that we connect and also can be original. And as Jason was saying, it's the easy bit is we're finding talent is promoting films. They are promoting our films at the moment. They're getting on the chat shows. They're doing they're doing interviews, which is great. And the media are still running reviews. So it's in that way you can get the profile of the films right. And the key bit is just getting the genre of the film right and the quality of it right.
Rory, when you're looking at a project and whether to develop or back a project, to what extent are you thinking about who the audience is and how specific that audience is?
Yeah, we always look at that really carefully, and you know, we kind of from the beginning, we actually worked with Rupert and Vertigo a couple of times early on, and I think they've always been great proponents of that. It's always a balance though, isn't it? Because if you try to pander to a specific audience, you probably get it wrong. We had a movie, actually, interestingly, just came out in March called Military Wives, which released just as the coronavirus was hitting, which was targeted at an older audience, which obviously wasn't ideal even in the early days of coronavirus, and then cinema shut. But we kind of look at, is this a great idea? Does this have a clear audience? And do we feel passionate about it? And I think, you know, you have to, it has to be good on all those fronts. If you just feel like, oh, there's a really clear audience for this, but you don't feel passionate about it, or just feel like it's good on any kind of subjective or objective level, then we try to steer clear of it. But equally, you know, everything I think is now changing. One of the things that we're now thinking about is, can we make this under current circumstances or under circumstances as we think they will be in 6 months' time? So suddenly, if it involves foreign travel, we're thinking, okay, that's harder. Does it involve other elements that are going to be complicated under the new protocols? Can we make this with fewer cast in a sort of small space, in the studio space, where we can keep the crew and cast small? But equally, I think that's also dangerous, because suddenly everyone's thinking that, and I don't know, in a year's time, you're going to be looking at the TV, switching off the things where you think, oh, well, I know why they made this, you know. And the moment you get that sense that you can feel the filmmaker's hand, you're in quite a dangerous place. As Rupert said, you know, you need to be connecting with an audience, however that is. So I think those smart ideas are right on the fringes of all of those things. But the moment it's too obvious that it was just made because it could be made, because it was contained, it's a switch off. So as frankly is always true, you know, the best ideas rise to the top, but I think the best ideas now have to be great ideas about how you make something under these circumstances without that being too obvious.
Is it not making all of you lean towards films, I mean, you know, deliberate, I mean, pragmatically, sensibly, lean towards films that don't have crowd scenes and don't have lots of people and don't have different locations? So although you're right that the audiences at some point will go, why do all these films, why is it all 6 people in a field? You're not
exactly
anyway to go, well, but actually that's what we can make at the moment. So,
absolutely, no, exactly. And I think, you know, if you can't make it, you absolutely, you know, you can't make it. But it's how you do that without it being obvious that that's the only reason it got made. But equally, you might not be able to do a crowd scene of 100 people, but could you do a sort of Lord of the Rings style battle scene with 10,000 people? Well, ironically, you probably can do that. So every single project, you know, there's no kind of rule where you go, okay, let's find out every single project you're sort of applying this test, can this work? And it's the one where you go, hang on a minute, weirdly, that kind of does work without being the obvious 4 people in a room, or 10,000, you know, battling orcs in a visual effects universe. You know, it's those smart ideas that will rise. And I wish I could tell you exactly what that was right now, but that's where the Gurinders of this world pop up and tell you a great idea.
I do think that on the plus side, you're absolutely right, Rory, because I think this is all asking us all to be inventive, you know. And there is a lot you can do with a green screen, definitely. You know, you need your actors for sure, Jason, but there is a lot that you can do with green screens and CGI and all kinds of digital stuff to make it appear like everyone's in the same space. It just makes it harder, I think, emotionally, you know. But I think that you're absolutely right. It is easier to shoot 10,000 people than 10, you know, in a room. So I think that you're right. We have to start applying ourselves in that way. But I also think that I see a lot of questions are coming up about COVID films, about the response, in response to what's going on. And I actually think people won't want to see anything to do with now, to be honest with you. I think that people will want to escape into probably period stuff or futuristic stuff, or, you know, genres that, you know, horror maybe, or genres that where this will be the underlying thing in the way that Alien, you know, was in many ways about cancer, right? I think we'll see those sort of symbolic kind of films about COVID-19 and what lockdown meant. But I also think it's a bit like, you know, how the HIV epidemic, you know, stunned people and affected people so directly, and how for certainly, you know, for a while, everyone was scared, you know, and then science stepped in, people, you know, had better messages, health messages, and then people sort of worked through that, and society changed, and now, you know, people don't necessarily die from HIV, but live with HIV with the right sort of drugs, and no one sort of questions, you know, filmmaking practices and whatever, if you're HIV, you know, whereas before it was like, oh, no. So I think that in time, we will just have to accept that this is one of those epidemics and one of those, what's it called, biomes that, you know, that are just there. And there'll be others, you know, as we get more sophisticated with our penicillin and whatever, there will be others. So I think it's been a salient reminder of how fragile we are really as humans, and our planet is so dependent on our deeds, you know. And hopefully those are the sort of messages that will be imbibed by us and come out in feel-good films, perhaps, you know, as well as all the other genres.
And have you seen, obviously, you know, we all try to adapt as best we can. Have any of you seen ways that people have been innovating in clever ways, or adapting either their production processes or just their sort of creative workflow? Jason, have you been impressed by the way new schemes that people have come up with, ways of working?
Actually, I've been stunned by how I've been stunned by how little anyone is changing, how the business has continued absolutely as normal, apart from the fact that nobody's filming. So the actors are at home, but writers are being commissioned. My writer friends are juggling 4 or 5 projects. Everybody who runs companies is having meetings morning till night. Everybody is juggling and waiting for someone to be the first to go back into production under these, what seem to me, you know, incredibly restrictive conditions, and seeing whether people could make it at a budget and whether they sell. So there's a kind of phony war going on, because no one, as far as I know, is already filming under these conditions, and no new projects have been funded. The things are just like the kind of madness and doublespeak you have from the politicians who are talking about getting back to normal. We all understand that normal will be different until there are scientific breakthroughs, but no one's acknowledged it yet. So no, I'm not seeing people doing anything different. I'm seeing writers taking on too many jobs and lying about how many films they've been commissioned to write, and directors prepping films. My mate's going to me, I have no fucking idea why they're talking to me like we're actually shooting in September, but I'll keep it going. I don't want to be the first person to say it's not going to happen. I'd be interested to know if anybody else, first of all, has seen people do things differently apart from working from home, but who is going to be the first to jump? Ollie, you're commissioning films as well, and everybody else is making films. Are any of you actually going to go into production sometime soon?
We hope to, and there's a huge amount of work going on at BFI and the task force level, and we and a lot of other organisations like us are feeding into those, and at government level, to try and kickstart the film and TV economy and get people back into production. And I think there will be those who either because financially they can, or because through personal choice and health reasons want to wait, but there are others who are very keen to get back to work. And obviously our job and producers' job is to make sure that they can do that safely and in as risk-free an environment as possible. But
so are you involved in the discussions with the government? Because I can't remember if it was Rupert or Rory was talking about, obviously the first and biggest stumbling block for independent film, if you're not financed by Netflix or Amazon, is can you get insured? Can you get bonded? Because if you can't even start the thing. Do you have any idea how advanced those discussions are?
They're happening and they're quite advanced. It's obviously a huge impediment to production. I mean, the insurance is a huge issue across every industry. It's a sort of central tenet of industry, but certainly ours is no exception to that. And so, no, a lot of work has been done on that. Obviously, you've seen in France, the fund's been created, and there are discussions around, or ideas being discussed of a similar nature here. So that will be a key piece for anything over, the most low budget of projects where financiers can sort of take on the risk themselves. So no, that will have to be resolved. And personally, I'm confident it will be resolved because it needs to for the industry to get back on its feet.
Some of the funds, the national lottery funds that the BFI and the others have been using to support companies during this time, maybe something there can be done in terms of bonding. Those using lottery funds for a bond.
I tell you, I was talking to someone the other day.
Sorry.
A cinephile the other day who was saying there was a myth around that after the Second World War, during and after the Second World War, what was most popular with audiences who flocked to the cinema was escape, was fantasy and escape. And actually that's not true. If you break down the enormous amount of films that are being put out, people wanted to deal with and think about rebuilding society and what society had been through and how they would like it to be, and the struggles of the ordinary person, working men and women. And I'm hoping, as I'm sure we all are, first of all, for business to be buoyant, but for us to tell stories that resonate, that don't just entertain, because that's the first and bottom line, and break even, but that are inspire change or hope or I don't know, emotional closure, but things that are of substance, and that we don't end up trotting out things similar to the kind of, because there's a lot of content needed for the 5 giant new streamers. And I hope that we see content that we are proud of, that becomes a golden age of creativity. And it's perfectly possible. I think the hunger will be there for that kind of connection, as you were saying.
And all the extra months of development, of course, that was going to make.
Well, development does not necessarily extra development does not make the thing polish. Does not polish it shinier.
Thanks for that. I'm sure there are a lot of people watching who are at the start of their career. And one question that's come through, and maybe others would be interested to hear your view on this, is what advice would you give to a first-time filmmaker making their first film next year? It's a fairly general question, but maybe you can shed some light on any pearls of wisdom you might have on that. Rupert?
Well, the kind of obvious thing to say is the cliche, but it's true, just do it. I mean, the technology is there to do it. It's extraordinary, the technology that's available now, with iPhones and the digital technology. And so, I mean, and I think as everyone's saying, Jason just said really well, though, is telling a story distinctly, originally, and inspirationally. And it doesn't have to be a story with 2,000 people. If it is your first film, I mean, it's going back to those, the sort of early, films I love, like the early, Richard Linklater films, and I say Lynn Shelton's movies, her early films, which were, people might say they're mumblecore, but they're just beautifully told stories with a few characters that say something, and they do resonate. And if you've got the talent, you can really demonstrate it on those kinds of films. So it's not to be overly ambitious in terms of, extras and everything else. And then, the other incredible example I've got is a film we made quite a few years ago, is Monsters, which is an incredibly low budget film made by Gareth Edwards, made with a crew of 10 people. And he did all the special effects, and obviously then went on to Godzilla and everything else. But there's the pure talent of the filmmaker shines through, and it was made on a pretty small budget. So if you've got the kind of the talent and the hunger to do it, you have to just do it, basically.
I totally agree. I think it's always been true. And when I was a runner, I worked on a movie called The Quiet American, directed by Philip Noyce. Amazing, brilliant director, a great man. And I remember saying to him, asking him how he started out, and saying, the problem is I can't quite get the funding to do this and that and the other. And he looked at me, he was like, you just got to just do it, just figure it out, just go on and do it. And it's easy to put those sort of obstacles in your own way, to say, well, I can't afford this, I can't afford that. As Rupert said, there's never been a better time, because you can make a movie on your iPhone. So all of those things go out the window. But also, look at us. Here we all are with sort of companies and careers we're certain way down the line of, and we're all sweating and struggling with these issues around coronavirus. And actually, so take the opportunity now, do innovate in the way that actually bigger companies, bigger film shoots can't, and figure out how you do it. Don't be irresponsible, of course, but figure out how you can shoot with a small crew around this whole issue. Actors have never been more available. Other talented creatives have never been more available. Take that opportunity now while others can't. I think, I don't want to make light of it. It's super hard making your first film, unbelievably hard, and I've been there and sweated through it. So I'm not making light of it, but don't let a good crisis go to waste. Use this moment and find your way, because suddenly there are opportunities that might not have been there a year ago, and use it if you can.
There's a very interesting point here from someone called Amanda Groom about Korea's leading the way in shoots, and much of production's back on track because that country's had extensive experience of dealing with viruses. Does anyone know anything more about that and what's going on in Korea?
Well, they've been doing a lot more testing and tracing than we have, and we're kind of pretty ahead of the game on that front. And they've used technology a lot as well, as I understand it. Obviously we're trying to, as a nation, get our app ready, and we'll see what the take-up is of that and how effective that is. But I know technology has been one of the main ways, and extensive testing.
I've got a friend who's looking to go shooting, in Taiwan, and some others who are looking to go to New Zealand, and basically countries that have tested and tracked better than us, and so they can isolate where the outbreaks are. So constantly there'll be no restrictions on the set. There won't be socially distancing. There'll just be, there won't even be testing. They have a temperature test, which is relatively useless and symbolic.
I think the challenge is, without widespread and readily available government testing, private testing is still too prohibitively expensive for all but the most well-resourced big studio movies to afford. Someone was telling me the current rate of a private test is about £400. So if you're trying to shoot a film for £1 million or a couple of million quid, that's not really viable as a way of testing an entire crew or your entire cast.
I think the quarantining is going to be that's a huge cost as well. Quarantining, guaranteeing the quarantine. How do you, if people all sign a waiver and they say we'll all stay in the hotel, including the cleaners and caterers of the hotel, do you police it? Do you have armed guards in the corridor? What do you do if you find someone going back to their family because you want to hire locally when you travel? But can I just say something about making films? Everybody's right. If you've got one of these, you've got an entire film studio. You can't just shoot. You can cut. You can score. You can do green screen. You can broadcast. You can even monetize. But I would disagree with the fact that you have to be talented, because you can be really crap as well. You can make 51-minute films, and your 51st might be a work of genius. It's free. And back, Rory, when you were on the set of The Quiet American, if you wanted to make a short film, you needed to have connections or wealthy parents. I mean, it was very difficult to get a cameraman and avid. And you can do all this now, and not just people, but time is available. So there's never any reason not to get started. And the other thing that none of us have addressed yet is, who are these new stories going to be for? Certainly Netflix and some of the other streamers are skewing very young. The most popular shows are for the young. independent films often have been for older people, or a slightly more complicated, three-dimensional, maybe nuanced material, non-genre material. And where is that going to settle and find itself a home? I hope that there will be a streamer somewhere that takes up that mantle.
Thanks for that. I think we've got time for one more question. Perhaps we can talk about, someone called Sabrina who said, how will your office environments change and will you continue to work from home after it's safe to do so? Just in terms of your working practices, Gurinder, have you got so used to your life at home that it's hard to imagine leaving it?
Well, I generally like to work from home anyway. So I'm generally at home. I normally do Skype calls, and especially when I'm writing, when I go into the office for meetings, you know, obviously, and I go out to places for meetings. But working from home, you know, that is quite normal for me.
I suppose a different question is, we've all got used to virtual interaction. To what extent do you think our industry relies on physical meetings and face-to-face? Can we forego that to some extent, or do you think it's vital for the lifeblood of the industry?
I would say 98% of the meetings I've ever had over the years have been utter bollocks and pointless and lovely. And there's been great food, and very little has ever been achieved that's come to fruition. It might make us all a bit more focused.
And I would definitely say, from this kind of the lockdown world, I mean, I wrote that word down earlier, is focus is the big thing that's come through. People have all got less time, and it's when you do speak to people on Zoom or whatever it is, everyone is always very, very quick to the point and focused about what they're doing. And I know from our point of view, I mean, I've worked from home, to be honest, 2 or 3 days a week for the last few years, so it's not a huge change. But from, you know, all the younger, well, the team back in the office, some of them are desperate to get back to the office because of the human interaction that they're missing. And I'm sure others, you know, will basically will want to go back to the office. So I think we'll just be a lot more flexible going forward.
Yeah, we would love to not be paying rent right now.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Not using this office in Soho. I'm wondering why we ever did. But I think it's amazing what you can achieve without it. But I sort of think also there is something sometimes that just gets created by people in a room. I think it's sometimes the most sort of obvious example, talking about film festivals earlier, is Cannes. I think on the one hand, you think, I've got to go to Cannes because I've got to see that person and I've got to have that lunch with that person. And actually, the only reason you do all of that is because they expect you to. And actually, if you can't, you can just get on a Zoom with them, and you didn't have to spend hundreds or thousands of pounds all going to somewhere in the south of France to meet and have lunch about something that may or may not happen. You can do it in half an hour on a Zoom. That said, the flip side of Cannes is that you go for that lunch, but it's the person you bump into on the street where you hear about this thing happening, or you hear about that piece of information, or some other new financier who might be in the market, that actually is the most important thing that comes out of that. And it's that sort of, and I think that's a reason that our industry exists, you know, a lot in Soho. It's often the things that you pick up by bumping into people and being around that, as a producer, I think can be immensely helpful to one's business. So yes, you can get on with everything, of course you can at home, but you know, I think we need a certain level of just that interaction, the ability to excite people about ideas, which needs a kind of group mentality to help do that. So yeah, it can carry on to some extent, but it's not the same.
So that rent is worth it, Rory. Well, thank you so much to all our panelists. Unfortunately, we're out of time. And thank you to Joe for organising this, and to H Club. That's it from us. Goodbye, everyone.
Good luck, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.